Hello, welcome to the show. My name's Northy. I'm from the wargaming team Epic Flail, and in this series of videos, I'm going to be talking about my experience and reflections of playing Marvel Crisis Protocol. It was a game that I promised I wouldn't play. I promised myself I wouldn't play it. I got enough games on the go. I just started playing 40k and doing like a series of channels about 40k, buying all these Imperial Knights that are everywhere. I'm still playing 40k. I'm still in a league in Brighton and really enjoying it. So I promised I wouldn't play MCP, but then I went to the York Weekender event, caught up with loads of mates. Me and my brother-in-law cheekily and sneakily bought loads of MCP stuff and hid it from my fiance in the boot so she didn't see it. Although she might have just heard that actually because she's only downstairs. Oh dear, that was daft. Anyway, after sneaking a load of stuff back, bought a load of models, and I've been getting into MCP, going down to Dice Saloon and playing a bunch of games. So I'm going to start creating content just on my reflections of MCP. I'm going to be going to tournaments, going to go into events, and as I play the game, I'll be getting more detailed around the competitive aspects of the game, talking more about tactics and strategies. In these early videos, I'm going to be sharing some of my reflections just on MCP as a game, and in this video in particular, I'm going to be sharing some advice that was given to me from the Marvel Crisis Protocol Facebook group, where I went on and just said, having my first games, give me your best advice. And I've compiled what I feel after a few games has been the best advice. So I'm going to be talking about that. Before I get into the video, really appreciate people watching. Really also appreciate feedback. Let me know what you think, and like and subscribe for more. Okay, so let's break down some of the things that I really have noticed and appreciated about Marvel Crisis Protocol. The first is I really like the precise nature of the game. So I've been playing 40k for a little bit. I've been playing 40k in this league, and as much as I do like 40k, but it's like not precise at all. It's like a really clunky, people's measurements of charging models and shooting is so stressful from someone who's come from a very precise war game like War Machine. Watching someone play 40k as a War Machine player is just so stressful. People like measure things. They're like, that looks about 7, and then roll the dice, and before you know it, the models start moving, and it's just total chaos. Marvel Crisis Protocol obviously is not like that at all. And the fact that the designers, Pagani and Schick, who've come from a War Machine background, they will have been, they've played that rule set and helped develop that rule set for a long time. And as tournament players, Pagani in particular, will have seen how the precise nature of the game creates a very fun, enjoyable rule set. I think a lot of people look at rule sets and think, if it's really precise, then it's really competitive and it's get like people get really fussy about it. I actually think it does the opposite. I think very precise movements and measurements create better outcomes for everyone. It's the kind of ambiguity of people moving and charging models that creates arguments and tension. So the precise nature is really interesting. And the fact that they provide their own measurement sticks and kind of system for moving is a really fun, interesting part of the game. I kind of enjoyed not having a tape measure, to be honest. It was great just using the sticks and measuring things down. So that clearly is great. Whether you're a casual player or a competitive player, the precise nature was very, very enjoyable and rewarding. The second thing that I noticed that I've really appreciated is the alternative goes are great. So they're like me go, you go, me go, you go. Is a lot different to other games that I've played. 40k, you can literally be sat for sometimes like 30, 40 minutes just listening to your opponent shooting and killing all your models. It's like, you can take that off now, take that off now. And although in 40k you're making saving throws, so there's a little bit of involvement and you can play stratagems to kind of interrupt. It's very reactionary. You're kind of just reacting to what your opponent's doing. And with someone who's got like an ADHD brain, I can drift off and have little 10-minute wonders in my mind while they're still moving and charging models around the table. So what I found about Marvel Crisis Protocol is it keeps me focused and locked in on the game. The alternative activation always keeps me engaged in what's going on, which from a gaming experience, whether it be casual or competitive and everything in between, is really appreciated and really enjoyable. And I've not had a system really for a long time that's done that I've got really into. So the alternative go I thought was great. The next thing was an element that I've appreciated in War Machine for a long time, and that is just like the scope of the rules. Like the individuality of all the superheroes is a lot of fun. The fact that you have lots of decisions, the alternative go system creates immediate decisions as to who you could activate. But when you're thinking about those activations, the scope and depth that all the characters have creates loads of options. So on one hand, that can feel somewhat overwhelming as a new player. You're like, oh my God, there are so many things that I can go with here. There are so many different paths and roads that I can walk depending on what I activate. And that can feel overwhelming. I've found the best thing is to just make an activation and just go for it and just get playing the game rather than trying to micromanage and plan your turn out, to the nth degree. Just get playing and get moving things. But the fact that the cards have so many different options that they can do, and it's not like it's not like they just have their basic attacks and then one superpower that they can do. Well, I mean, I know there's some cards that have that, but often there are just a number of interesting things that you can do. And the next thing I noticed and really, really appreciated is the amount of list building that you can do. So there's obviously like quite a lot of options because you don't have to have a full roster of the affiliation that you're taking. You can bring in other superheroes from different affiliations. So from like a roster building perspective, I absolutely love that. You're playing a lot of 40k, the lists tend to kind of write themselves, and there's not that, if you want to play a competitive list, there's not that much depth. There's kind of like, this is the A grade list and the rest is like, B, C, D, E, and F. Whereas in MCP, there are clearly loads of different ways of playing affiliations and loads of characters that you can bring in that mix up the list and change it. So one thing I really liked about War Machine is I could go away and sit and build lists for hours and look at all the different combinations of units and solos and war beasts and stuff that I could take. And MCP has the same feel to it, right? You can just go away and write rosters and write lists and kind of think about the game, explore it all through the apps that you can get. So I thought that was great. That's a really good thing to do. And alongside that, I think that depth in terms of bringing in other characters into your roster, that creates quite an interesting bit of balance as well. So like, a new character comes out, a new superhero that's really powerful, well, everybody's got access to it. And I know there's some have come out that have come a little bit hot off the block and a little bit spicy and have disrupted the game, and I'm sure that will always happen in any rule set. But as a system, that because you can dip into those other affiliations, it feels fairly balanced. If there's a bit in your roster that your affiliation, or just a bit of your affiliation that it really struggles with, we don't have any big tanky guys like Rhino who can just get in the middle of the board and start flying around and punching things and grabbing stuff, well, just take Rhino. Just go find one of those models that ticks that box. So that depth, I think, is really, really interesting. But alongside that, the affiliations all feel like they have quite a unique play style and feel. I've been playing against Web Warriors as Criminal Syndicate. I've been playing against Web Warriors, and they clearly have a distinct feel about controlling the board, slowing you down, moving you off points. Whereas Criminal Syndicate, I'm just getting on points and standing there and just being like, I've got one guy on this point, you've got to bring two to get me off it. So there's clearly a nice little play style and distinction between all those affiliations, which again is a really nice aspect to the game. A couple of things that people warn me about though is the spikiness of the dice. So a bunch of people have said the dice are a bit of a cruel mistress. Like, you kind of just got to ignore the spiky element, and that definitely is a thing. Like, if there's one like wobbly a bit of the competitive rule set, it's that those dice can just be all over the place. You can roll 8, 9 dice and get absolutely nothing. Roll 4 and suddenly be on fire and hitting crits, and ends up being an insane roll. So the dice, I think, clearly are a bit of a part of the game where there is a strong element of randomness. However, because the game is so focused on objective holding, it's so scenario focused. Dazing, KOing models is an important part of the game, but it's not how you're gonna solely win. You're not have dazed, 3 characters, and therefore gonna win just off that. You're gonna win through them not participating in the scenario itself, which obviously has viable elements to the strategy. But ultimately, the focus is who's controlling assets and objectives. There are definitely abilities and powers that move people off and around objectives that don't require dice rolls. So a lot of the powers I've noticed, or the throws, just move people off and away. And it doesn't really matter how good your dice are. So I think the spikiness of the dice in some ways is a bit stressful, but it's also offset by the fact that if you focus on the strategic element of moving people off points, the abilities that often do so are just power-based abilities and don't need specific dice. So, I mean, I need more games, I think, to evaluate the dice part of it. There's definitely a theme of the players that are winning events, those better lists being lists that care less about the dice. They obviously nobody wants their dice to be bad, but they're not relying solely on the dice. They've got systems and ways of winning. They get like Web Warriors, or just focus on scoring objectives, slowing people down, rather than moving people off the board. And that kind of makes sense. It makes sense that those lists are the ones that are doing better, or the competitive players that wanting to win events are focusing on. The other bit that's just really fun and really cool is just throwing things. the fact that the terrain is just destroyed, you know, thrown at things and destroyed, is really fun. This is less so about the competitive element of the game. It's just a fun experience. It's like, you know, grabbing a building, lobbing it at a character, and that building's gone. It makes you feel like something has happened on the table. And every game that I've played, there's been something that I can remember from the game, like something, you know, I can remember huge bits of terrain just hitting characters and knocking them out. It creates kind of a thematic experience that I don't think you get in other games. And because the terrain is thrown around and the terrain's like a really important part of the game, what I've noticed is people go to a high degree of effort with their boards. I've played on some absolute horror boards in 40k, and over the years, War Machine would just be like 2D neoprene that would be cut out, and it wouldn't be thematic in any way at all, really. Whereas Marvel, you can have a really competitive rule set, a very precise rule set, but the table can also look amazing. And I don't think other games have got that quite right. 40k, some of the tables can look amazing, but they're an absolute horror show to play on. Like, you know, Imperial Knights balancing on things. It's just so stressful. And it ends up creating really inaccurate experiences. You're like, oh, well, it's kind of there. We both know it's facing that way. And that has, you know, it's not where it can fit, but you both just kind of agreeing that's where it is. And War Machine, very precise, but just looks so dull. Like, you're just playing on flat neoprene everywhere. Whereas Marvel's got a really great mix, hasn't it? Where the tables look cool, you're throwing scenery, so it's changing, but it's also really tight. It's a really tight rule set. So I really appreciate that bit. And I also noticed the value in throwing. Like, the throws are just so much better than making attacks. Just that auto hit, and just, you don't even have to roll any dice. It sidesteps some of the spiky dice element. So on the whole, in terms of reflections of the game, really enjoyed it. Like, really, really fun rule set. I'm looking forward to getting more games in already. It seems like a really fun, kind, positive community with tons of events going on. And the game itself is just really cool, fun experience. Really, really liked it. Looking forward to getting some events and seeing what the tournament experience is like. But although I've got high hopes for it, because I know a bunch of people that are playing it competitively all the time, and they're raving about it and enjoying it. So the only bit that worries me is the amount of models that I now want to buy and the number of affiliations that I think are interesting. That is not good. Okay, so let's look at some of the advice that I was given from the community about getting into the game, those things that I should focus on and pay attention to as a new player. So I'll give people shout outs and put on screen the advice. Really appreciate, got loads of comments, really appreciate everybody that jumps in and said something on the thread. It really helped me in my first few games. And let's look at what I thought was some of the best advice now and kind of break it down a bit. So the first one, this is from Matthew Williamson, and he said, don't rush through turns. There's a lot of details to this game, and it's super easy to miss small things that could very much impact how the game is going. Take your time and make sure everything is resolved before moving on. The reason I think this is good advice is, again, I come from other rule sets where it can feel quite time pressured. 40k, you get if you're playing competitively, you get really long round times, like 3 hours, which is a ridiculous amount of time, but you still create this kind of lethargy in the turns where people are taking way, way, way too long. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum, you've got War Machine, where people play on a clock. You can end up with these really frantic, stressed turns. And again, it's a game that can go on for a very long time. Marvel, you can take your time because the games aren't mega, mega long. And you've got a lot to think about, but ultimately you're just activating one model and doing kind of one set of things. You've not got this like huge, huge, huge turn that you need to map out and plan out. But I really like the idea of just like, yeah, take your time. Don't be ridiculous and be sat there looking for every single possible outcome. But, you know, you don't necessarily have to just quickly rush to the first thing that comes to mind and do it. Take your time about it. It's a quick game, you know. Especially in the early games, I found the great thing about the community. I've kind of gone, right, I'm almost overwhelmed with options. Just help me pick a model to kind of zone in on and focus on. And my opponent has been like, yeah, you've got loads of options, but go with Rhino. I'd be like, okay, what does Rhino do? Oh, yeah. He's good. But it's a good piece of advice for a new player, just generally, I think, is to do take your time. Don't feel the pressure of having to play at the same speed of your opponent, who's very likely to be more experienced. Take your time and ask your opponent, do what I would just mention there, like, which model do you think I should activate? And they'll probably point you in the right direction of the best model to focus on, and then let your turn fold out from there. A lot of that depends on how kind and good your opponent is, and any good community should recognize a newer player and pair them with someone who's patient, has a good depth of understanding of the rules and will kind of help someone through it. But I thought that was good. That was a good starting piece of advice, and I found really helpful. Okay, so the next piece of advice came from Richard Robb, who said, 1, have fun, win or lose. Some of the best games I've had ended with me losing. The game is just fun. 2, make it your objective to use a few tactic cards consistently. 3, try to focus on objective. 4, don't hesitate to play aggressive. There is no hiding in this game. 5, have fun. I found all those things really useful. Number 1, obviously, when you're just starting out, just enjoy it, get involved in the game. Don't stress too much about the end goal. That's always good. That's always good, solid advice. The tactics cards, I felt completely overwhelmed to start with how many tactics cards there are, or even just where we find them. You know, like the rule book. Do you buy the card pack? Do you have to get them online? Which ones are legal? Which ones are restricted? So overwhelming. I found it really helpful just to have a few that I would really focus on and make sure I used. And now I'm comfortable with it. I've been playing on TTS. I'm fine with a bunch of tactics cards, and I know what I'm doing. But in those first few games, it was good just to have a couple that I kind of knew I would look for a key moment to use them. So I thought that was great. Focusing on the objective is obviously the most crucial, fundamental piece of advice I was given, full stop, with MCP. The temptation is to get in there, start doing loads of stuff, start days and knock people out, instead of just like, okay, put models in positions where they're causing a threat and scoring points. Focus on the objective, focus on the score, rather than get too excited by attacking things. And that, like, don't hesitate to play aggressive, I think is really good advice, especially if you're just starting out. Just get models up there, get doing stuff, get interacting. The great thing about MCP is, yeah, sure, your models can get removed from the board. They can get, like, days knocked out. They're out of there. But also, like, you can just get things up in people's grill, make a mistake. It takes a load of damage. If it's taken a load of damage, then it's going to do something really fun. If it's taken so much damage that it's dazed, well, that's fine. It's still going to be back to you next turn anyway, and you've still got all that power. You can do something really fun with it. So I didn't feel punished for aggression. I might not have won the game through being overly aggressive, but I could get aggressive and still have loads of options to do things with. You know, I think back to other game systems. You get too aggressive, you just lose the model. You know, you get too aggressive in War Machine, you lose your cast, the game ends. You get too aggressive in 40k, you just lose loads of models, and you're like, well, they're never going to do anything. That's annoying. They're off the table. Whereas MCP, it's like, okay, well, I mean, I maybe shouldn't have put it there, but it's going to do something next turn. So I thought that was a really good observation, good thing to say. The next piece of advice was from Damien Medhurst, and he said, remember the importance of passing. If you've left less models to activate than your opponent, often it is better to give them a go and react to their move rather than let them have free actions at the end of the round. This was great advice, and it took me a game or two to get my head around it. I'll be doing it frequently, but what you don't want to do is just get to an end of a turn and your opponent, well, the end of, you run out of activation, and your opponent have like 2-3 activations left, where it can just chain a bunch of things together really well, and you not be able to interact and stop them happening that. So the idea of passing on one of your models to kind of, all right, you go on, you go again, just so that I can respond and do something to it, rather than you going and just leaving your opponent with a bunch of actions, a bunch of activations at the end, was really, really good advice, and something that I hadn't experienced because I've not played other games like that. So that was a really good thing to get my head around early on. I thought it was excellent advice. The next one was from Jay McLeod, who said, first game, don't even bother with tactics cards. Scoring may be more important than killing, but oftentimes you need to kill to score. It's not really much of a trade-off either, because you get 2 actions and none of your actions are score points. Relatedly, remember you need power to score, and you almost always want to interact with that power to lock in a point before spending on cool and fun things. So for the first game, I didn't bother with tactics cards, and I think that is reasonable and sensible. As I said, I slowly started to implement them in time, and now I'm fine with a whole bunch of them. But first game, it's probably just focus on the models, and there's enough just going on the cards anyway without another system to layer on top of it. But again, it's reiterating that point of, like, scoring's more important than killing, but sometimes you need to kill to score. So yes, objectives and assets, they're really important, but sometimes you do need to drop things. Just make sure you're dropping and killing things as part of that bigger picture. And also the need, it was a good reminder that you need the power to pick up the objectives, or the assets, and hold them. So that was a good thing for me to get in my head and remember, not having, like, Black Cat run up to something and be like, oh, I can't pick it up. Next piece of advice was from Patrick Hope. He said, I would start with a very simple tactic cards that don't rely on specific conditions and have them go off. Make sure you understand how these work and when you will choose to use them. There can be a lot of power in these cards, and timing is absolutely key to winning in high-level games. But don't worry about winning, worry about using them all. Brace for impact. So you then give me some really good ones to use. Brace for impact and use it the first time something thrown at you. Grappling hook, use it late game for a movement bump. Get patch up and use mid-game to heal someone. Some cards are no longer legal, but just ignore that for now. That bit I found in which cards were legal and restricted, I found that quite confusing. I've got my head around it now. It was really helpful that it just gave me some cards, just like use these. These initial cards are great and they'll come up in every game. They're the cards that I focused on using to start with. Don't worry about winning. Again, that's really good advice, as a few people mentioned. The next one was from Chris Young, who said, to add to the objective comments, attacking should be seen as a way of controlling the battlefield, i.e. less models to cover points or drop extracts. Attacking randomly just gives them more power for stuff or gives them priority due to having less models. Again, really sensible and reinforcing the key part of MCP is that score. Focus on the score, focus on controlling those objectives, focus on getting those extracts, and also don't just like needlessly attack things. There's lots of bits of the game now where I'm like, oh, I definitely, just because I can attack and put a load of dice into that model absolutely doesn't mean that I should. I was thinking about situations where, the opponent had a character that only had a few power and it not really taking any damage, and I was thinking of levering it, and at best case scenario, I'm not going to kill it, I'm just going to stack a load of damage on it and give it a load of power. There are obviously some times where I can see the benefit of doing that. If you want to drop them the next round, you may as well get them close to that final point of dying, or they've already activated, and you think, well, I'm not going to do anything this turn anyway, and if I've got priority, maybe I can definitely finish them, I'll get to attack them again. But there were a lot of cases where that just wasn't how it would play out, and I'd just be shooting something and levering something that I'm then just firing up and giving loads of power to do something. So that was a really useful piece of advice for me to think about when I'm attacking something. Bear in mind the consequences of that attack. Make sure you're not just shooting something for the sake of being able to shoot it. Consider the consequences of doing so and how important that is in your bigger overall game plan of scoring and winning on those objectives. The next piece of advice from my good friend Kurt Thayer, who said, take your time with your order of activations. Consider if dazing or KOing someone will give away priority if you have it. If you go last, consider who can get you the most VPs with the last activation. Sometimes a less efficient activation now will give a better turn next round. Again, just really sensible, experienced advice there with regards to your activations and why you're doing things. Consider if dazing or KOing someone will give away priority if you have it. That's really key and crucial. You might think, oh, that's amazing, I'll daze that, but then that means your opponent's not going to go. They're going to end up nicking the priority off you next turn if it was something that you'd already had. So again, that consequence of just just dazing models feels like a really, really important part of the game, and definitely helped me out. Definitely helped me focus in terms of why am I attacking something? What's the purpose? What's the logic with it? Next bit of advice was from James Woodward, who said, as a general rule, save your power for superpowers rather than blow on spender attacks. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. That I'm still thinking about this one. I've put it on there on the list. I thought it was interesting that the spender attacks being the attacks that you do on another model that require you to spend power rather than just the basic one, which doesn't cost anything. So what he's saying is it's better to use your power to do your kind of more interactive, useful maneuvers on the board rather than just burning it on a spender attack. I haven't thought about that loads in my games. There were some games where I just got excited and think, oh, I'm going to do more damage. But I guess this is a reflection of what I'd said about, earlier on around the dice, that yeah, it's great doing loads of damage on a model, but I think the way your people are winning at the game is by using their power to do things that are absolutely guaranteed to take place rather than relying on dice. So, for example, spending power to move yourself to an objective where you will definitely score or contest rather than a spender, he's calling it a spender attack, in the hope that you will kill a model. So, like, just do the things that guarantee you the points rather than risking and rolling the dice. So it's an interesting one because I've not heard anybody else say that in my games. Have been like, yeah, sure, use your power, get doing those high damage attacks. But I think he's onto something, and he's referencing the point I made earlier on in the video around the best way of spending power is to do it, is to use it that guarantees you something happening rather than just hope and pray on the dice. And the last one is just a great piece of advice because I used Rhino. It's from my good friend Matt Darville, who said, use this is a robbery with Rhino and chase some asset nabber down. It's just great advice because I've had so much fun playing with Rhino. He is an absolute terror. He's hilarious. And yeah, he has been chasing people down with this is a robbery, grabbing assets and just standing all over the place. You look at that model and you think, oh, he's only slow movement, but man, does he get going and charging around. Funnily enough, as the name suggests, like a Rhino. So I thought that was a great piece of advice because he knew that. In fact, he was the person who gave me Rhino, which is why he gave me that specific advice. Cool, so that's kind of my main thoughts and reflections on the game. That's some of my best pieces of advice that were given to me. Really appreciate everybody that jumped in on that thread and really appreciate the Brighton community who've been very welcoming, been getting loads of games in with them and look forward to many more. Thanks so much for watching the channel. Thanks for watching the show. Really, really appreciate it. We'll have lots more MCP content to come. So come with us on this journey as we embrace the world of MCP and spandex. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.